Hi guys, it's Pastor Kerry. And one of the things that I've become convinced of after talking to atheists in person and listening to them online is that there's just a whole lot of denominations of atheism. Why do I say that? Because oftentimes I hear people say, well, you're misrepresenting atheism and that's not what it's really about. And so I don't want to do that. I want to be fair in my understanding of how another person thinks and their approach to life. And so I've been doing my best to better understand atheism, at least probably the garden variety of atheism. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But first, what I want to do is that if you're approaching this video from the standpoint of a person of faith, is that I want you to understand that there are a lot of implications for not only for our lives, but our understanding of reality if atheism is true. And so I want to talk about that. Let's play a game. What if atheism is true? What are we to make about that? Well, before we get into the content of that, let me just step back and share with you what I discovered atheism is from the American Atheists website. Now, I realize they don't speak for every atheist, but here's what they say. Atheism is one thing, a lack of belief in gods. And so it says, atheism is not an affirmative belief that there is no God, nor does it answer any other question about what a person believes. It's simply a rejection of the assertion that there are gods. Atheism is too often defined incorrectly as a belief system. To be clear, atheism is not a disbelief in gods or a denial of gods. It is a lack of belief in gods. Now, honestly, I don't think that's a very clear sentence, but nevertheless, is that I stepped back because I wanted to unpack that and better understand it. And what I discovered is that disbelief simply means that it is the inability or refusal to believe in something. Now, a lack of belief is just simply being without. And so I found that to be interesting. I actually call this variety of atheism ho-hum atheism. Because if I'm understanding it correctly, ho-hum atheism tells us about the psychology of you or your friends if they happen to be atheists. But in reality, that's not very interesting. Let me explain what I mean. But first, I want you to notice one more thing that I found on the exact same page of the website of the American Atheists. It says this: if you call yourself a humanist, a free thinker, a bright, that's pretty modest, isn't it? Or even a cultural Catholic, and lack belief in God, you are an atheist. Don't shy away from the term, embrace it. Agnostic is just a weaker version of being an atheist. It answers a different question. But then it says this: atheism is about what you believe. Now, I guess make up your mind. Is it a lack of belief or is it about what you believe? But it says agnosticism is about what you know. Now, it goes on to say on their website, only about 5% of people call themselves atheist. But if you ask about belief in gods, 11% say that they do not believe in gods. And so belief or lack of belief, whatever you want to call it, let's just see if we can better understand it and its implications for our lives. But I say that ho-hum atheism is about your personal psychology, at least as best as I can understand what the American Atheists organization is saying, that it's about your personal psychology, your beliefs or your lack of belief, however you want to frame it. But your personal psychology is just a small portion of reality. For me, a more interesting question is just simply this: what is our larger reality really like. And so not private reality or subjective experience or subjective psychological states, but what is larger reality really like. Now, atheists will often say, well, you have the burden of proof on that. And then we don't shoulder any burden. You're the one who's making a positive claim about reality, not us. Now, I really believe that this is just philosophical sleight of hand. And here's why. Imagine resting on a table. There's a clear bottle on the table. And the lid's on the top. And some person might say that the bottle is absolutely empty. When they look in, they don't see anything. And so they say that the bottle is absolutely empty. But others could claim that the bottle is actually full. It's full of air molecules. It's full of protons and neutrons and electrons. And so my question is just simply this. Who is making a positive claim about reality? And how could we tell? And I think the answer to that is just reason and evidence. So can we listen to the reasons why you think the way that you think, or listen to the reasons why I think the way that I think, and consider the evidence? And immediately, and actually, if you listen to atheists enough, you're going to hear a lot of the same old things, the same old objections come up, and immediately an atheist will say, or oftentimes they'll say, but there is no evidence that God exists. Now, I find that to be interesting, because now this is a positive claim about reality. The atheist is now speaking about, no longer speaking about their personal psychological state, but they're saying in all of reality that whether it's reason or evidence, is that there is no evidence that God exists. So when someone says this, they have moved from I lack belief in a personal God, or I lack belief in gods or whatever, and that's a personal statement. It's talking about your personal psychology, is that you lack belief. But as soon as you say there is no evidence that God exists, is that this is a universal claim. It's no longer about you. You're really saying that there's absolutely no evidence that God exists. And you've moved from this lack of belief to a statement of belief. And I know that atheists are oftentimes allergic to that B word, but you've moved from a lack of belief to a statement of belief about the nature of reality. And that's what I'm interested in, is that while I'm interested in your personal psychological states, what I'm really interested in is the nature of reality and the reasons that we have and the evidence that we have for our understanding of reality. Now, what I've discovered is that many atheists are materialists. And John Lennon encapsulated that concept very effectively in his song, Imagine. He says this, that imagine there's no heaven, it's easy if you try, no hell below us, above us, only sky. Only the natural realm, only the sky above us, or in the heavens, whatever you want to say, in the universe, but there is nothing beyond that. And it says, imagine all the people living for today. Now, materialists, I'm not talking about every denomination of atheists right now. I'm talking about atheists who are materialists or metaphysical naturalists. So in other words, above us only sky, is that they have some explaining to do about the features of reality that we encounter in our daily lives or in the world around us, in our own personal experience. Now, in my last video, I talked a little bit about the realities that we encounter in nature, including the inorganic natural realm and the organic natural realm. And there's a number of things that I just don't think fit well in an atheistic or a materialistic or naturalism point of view. Things like the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the information that we find in organic life is that that life itself, how did it come into being? Is that the complexity of life and the diversity of life. Now understand, and I think understand many of the point of view of materialists and naturalists, but I believe that their point of view is very deficient in explaining this wide range of things that we encounter in the world, by the way, including mathematics, which I was trying to categorize exactly where I would slot that, but I think that I would slot that over under the rubric of inorganic natural experiences, realities. And it's an interesting question. Is math discovered? It's really interesting. We're not going to get into that. But is math discovered or is it invented? And our answer to that question will begin to open up our thinking about these things. But when I look at the vast sweep of experience or things that we encounter in reality, is that there are a number of things that start to just not make any sense, at least from my point of view, with respect to a materialistic point of view or metaphysical naturalism, that above us is only sky. And that would include things like rationality, morality, free will, purpose, meaning, value, destiny, human rights, justice, and law. And we're not going to unpack all of those in this particular video, but I do want to take a look at some of those and some of the implications if materialistic atheism is true, or metaphysical naturalism, the atheist who subscribes to metaphysical naturalism is true. What are the implications for the things that we encounter in our human experience? Let's ask the question about rationality. Now, rationality is the quality of being based on or in accordance with reason or logic. And right away, you bump up against a couple things in that sentence, that reason and logic, which both are non-material things. And that raises the question but if all of our thoughts are just chemical reactions, because think about it, within the materialistic point of view, is that's the only explanations that you have for the base, the foundational truths about reality, is that it's all a natural process, and natural processes are all based on energy or physics or chemistry or something of that nature. So that if all of our thoughts are just chemical reactions in our brains, then what becomes of reason or logic? How do you account for reason and logic if it's just a chemical reaction in your brain? If we are just a brain, that brain is driven by electrochemical reactions, then none of our thoughts would be the product of intentional deliberation. And atheists would believe in atheism because that's just how their brains work. Because what other explanation is there? Is that if everything ultimately is based on natural processes at work, then truly nothing is based on reason or logic. Pierre Cabanis, not to be confused with Pierre Cannabis. He doesn't care about questions like this. But Pierre Cabanis, who was a materialist and I can't remember what else. He's a French materialist and philosopher, and I think he was a physiologist. But okay, well, enough of that. It doesn't matter. You can look him up on Wikipedia. So he said this, is that the brain secretes thought like the liver secretes bile. So it's just a part of the natural processes at work in the brain. So if that's the case, then how does the materialist account for rationality? That's just one of the problems that I see that atheists who are materialists or atheists who are metaphysical naturalists, that they bump up against this is, how do you account for a reason and logic if it's all electrochemical reactions that are taking place in the individual's brain? The second problem that I see when we're talking about the wide scope of our human experience, not just those things that we encounter in nature and in the inorganic sciences and the organic sciences, but the question of what is the objective basis or the basis of objective moral values and duties. Now, C.S. Lewis, I like what he said about this. He says, everyone acts as if morality is objectively real. He writes, whenever you find a man who says he doesn't believe in real right and wrong, you'll find that same man going back on this a moment later. He will break his promise to you, but if you try breaking one to him, he'll be complaining, it's not fair, before you can say Jack Robinson. So, is that everyone acts as if morality is objectively real. But aren't morals just a product of society, we might ask? Well, if that's the case, then why were the Nazis wrong for adopting the policies that they did? And why were we right for trying them at Nuremberg? Furthermore, now if morality is just based on society, the whole social construct approach to explaining morality, then how could a reformer make his case that there's a better way for society? To what authority would he be appealing? He wouldn't be appealing to society because he is critiquing society. So then maybe morality is just a matter of personal choice. But if that's the case, then why was Charles Manson wrong for doing what he did? That's what he chose for himself. So it just doesn't seem to make sense that morality is ultimately grounded, and moral values and duties are ultimately grounded in society or the individual. So maybe morality is just a product of evolution. Because after all, the naturalist doesn't have any other places he can turn to explain this phenomenon that we experience of that there are objective moral values and duties. Well, evolution might explain what promotes survival. It does not explain what denotes good or evil. That concepts, those categories seem to predate even the existence of human life. Is that if it's moving towards that, those goods, I guess, if you will, or some sort of teleology that's moving towards that end, is that we're getting better and better as time goes on. But furthermore, think about this. All sorts of evils, war, rape, slavery, and racism, have actually brought us this far in our evolutionary story. So does that mean that these evils were actually good, since they promoted our survival to date? You look back over human history and you see it just littered with all of these things. And so is it fair to argue that these things actually have contributed to our survival to date? So how would we critique these as being objectively wrong? War, rape, slavery, racism. And what's the basis that we can appeal to? Now, Sam Harris, and I'll grant it, he's a smart guy. He's I believe, a neurobiologist. He says that the basis of morality is founded on principle. And here's what he says it is that the science of morality is about maximizing, notice that word there, by the way. The science of morality is about maximizing psychological and social health. It's really no more inflammatory than that. Now, when I step back, because, we're oftentimes enamored by people in lab coats when they speak, but when I step back from that for a moment and think about it, there's really some problems with this particular definition of the basis, or this description of the basis for moral values and duties. And here's just simply this, is that who gets to decide what maximizes human flourishing? Politicians, scientists, psychologists, get those folks to agree about anything, or sociologists again. So who gets to decide about this? Academics, clergy? Who makes the final decisions about what's truly, after all, Hitler was even doing what he did not because he thought that this is, I'm going to perpetrate this great evil on humans, is because he really believed that his philosophy would lead to the betterment of humanity. And then I would ask, why is human flourishing more important than some other species? Isn't that just another version of speciesism? But isn't the human flourishing standard, maximizing human flourishing, a moral ought to begin with? So where did you come up with that? And you see, that's what we're trying to establish. We're trying to establish what is the basis for moral values and duties. And some slogan, like what Sam Harris offers, is really not offering us any sure foundation upon which we can discern these things. So how does the materialist, that's my question, how does the materialist account for moral values and duties? There's just one other thing that I want to consider here in this particular broadcast is what about free will? How does the materialist or the metaphysical naturalist explain free will? David Hume, he was a Scottish philosopher who died in 1776, a good year, by the way. He said that free will is the power of acting. It's the power of acting or not acting accordance to the determination of the will. So when you will something, you can either act upon that or not act upon that. And that's what it means to have free will. But notice where modern atheism, and these folks that I'm citing here are atheists. They're self-professed atheists. They may not be in the denomination of other atheists, but they would stridently self-identify as atheists. They say this, DNA, Richard Dawkins says DNA neither cares nor knows. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Sam Harris says free will is an illusion. I wonder if he thinks the same about his free will. But free will is an illusion. Our wills are simply not of our own making. By the way, if that's the case, then his atheism is not a belief or not a philosophy that he has chosen to believe. It's just what his brain states have forced him to believe, determined him to believe. That Stephen Hawking, he wrote this: "It is hard to imagine how free will can operate if our behavior is determined by physical law." So I'm not putting words into atheists' mouths. Here's what they're saying themselves: is that so it seems that we are no more than biological machines, and that free will is just an illusion. Now, if our brain states determine our choices, now remember, there are no other explanations than natural ones for the materialist or metaphysical naturalist, then our brain states, and then no one could be commended for doing good or condemned for doing evil. They're dancing to their DNA. They don't have the free will to choose. They are driven by the electrochemical mechanisms of their brain. So riddle me this. It's pretty simple. What becomes of rationality, morality, and truth without free will? So how does the materialist, the atheist who's a materialist, account for free will? Well, we've seen that many popular atheists say that it's just an illusion. It doesn't exist. Or has he given up on the notion of free will altogether? I think that's the natural consequences of the approach of atheism or materialism or metaphysical naturalism. But ask yourself, does this truly make sense? When you reflect on your own human experience, do you really believe yourself to be free? Or you're just driven, and you're just dancing to your DNA? Materialists, metaphysical naturalists, they have some splaining to do about the features of reality. It's just not the Christian that has some splaining to do about these things. They have some splaining to do about nature and about human experience, the origin of life, the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the origin of life, the information that we find in DNA, the complexity of life, the diversity of life, the existence of mathematics, our human consciousness. What about rationality, morality, and free will? These are just some of the things that materialists have to explain if they're going to have a cohesive and comprehensive worldview. Purpose, meaning, value, destiny, human rights, justice, and law. So what if atheism is true? I said in a previous broadcast that atheism is a lot like a mental. That's a variety of Swiss cheese. It's the one that has the most holes in it. When I begin to look at the things that we have to explain within the scope of reality, is that atheism or materialism or metaphysical naturalism just comes up short and is extremely unsatisfying in the answers or lack of answers that it supplies. And so people who believe or who say above us only sky, and this type of atheist have a difficult time explaining these features of nature and run into even more difficulties when it comes to accounting for various aspects of human experience. Now, that's something to think about. Hey, thanks for spending a little bit of time with me as we go through this. I want to talk more about these concepts in a future broadcast, because what I want to do is I want to examine, like I said, the scope of the things we encounter, these incorrigible things that we encounter in reality, and see what worldview best describes, is most comprehensive and coherent and cohesive with respect to those things that we encounter. That's it for now.